Are you ready to simplify your life and prepare for anything? Whether it's an emergency, a survival situation, or just one of those insanely busy days when you can't think about dinner, shelf-stable meals in a jar are the ultimate solution. In this video, I'll show you how to make 2 delicious, nutritious meals that will be ready and waiting whenever you need them, no matter the reason. Hey guys, it's Jara with Wicked Prepared. Welcome back to the channel. Imagine having a delicious, comforting meal ready in minutes just by adding water. Homemade meals in a jar give you just that. Not only are they perfect for simplifying your everyday life, but they're also a smart and reliable addition to your emergency preparedness plan. Today, I'm bringing you a new installment in our super popular Just Add Water Soups Meal in a Jar series. I have 2 brand new meal in a jar recipes to share that take their cue from 2 fast food favorites, cheeseburgers and tacos. Let's jump right into the recipes, but be sure to stick around until the end of the video because I want to give you some tips on how to save some money and cut down the cost for putting these meals together. The first recipe I'm making today is taco soup. As usual, all we need for our meals in a jar is some very basic equipment. We're going to use a wide mouth quart-sized mason jar with a good sealing lid. And we're going to use a canning funnel to get everything in the jar easily. And then we're just going to use some basic measuring utensils. If you want to keep these on the shelf for longer than a few months, you're going to want a 200cc oxygen absorber to put inside the jar. All right, let's get started on our first meal. For the taco soup, we are going to start with some Hamburg, and this is freeze-dried Hamburg. I'm going to use 1 cup of the Hamburg. Next, I'm going to be adding our powdered ingredients because those are going to filter down into the spaces between those crumbles of Hamburg, and that's going to give us a little bit more space in our jar. So I'm going to start with some sour cream powder. I like a little bit of creaminess in my taco soup. This isn't going to make it super creamy, but it just is enough to kind of cut that sort of acidity of the tomato products in the soup, I feel like. And so I do like to include it. And we're using a 1/4 cup of the sour cream powder today. Next, I'm adding my taco seasoning. I buy this in bulk just because it's the cheapest way to do it. If I'm just making a batch of tacos, I use about a 1/4 cup, which is about the same as 1 packet of taco seasoning. And today we're going to be using 3 tablespoons. It's just as easy to just measure it right out of a container like this and save a little bit of money. So there's 1, 2, 3 tablespoons because we do love tacos and taco flavored dishes, taco inspired dishes like this soup, different casseroles and things. So we do use a lot of taco seasoning in our house. Shaking that will settle all those powdered ingredients down, like I mentioned. Next, I'm going to be using some tomato powder. Now, this is just tomatoes. It's made from tomatoes that have been dried and then powdered, so that's all it is. It's a really great item to have in your kitchen because it can stand in for tomato sauce, tomato paste, tomato juice, all sorts of different tomato products. It's very, very concentrated, so I use it pretty sparingly. There's nothing in this besides the tomatoes. There's no salt or anything, so if you are typically used to using salted tomato sauce, salted tomato juice, and things like that, you'll add some salt with this. Our dish is going to have plenty of salt from that taco seasoning. Now, I got this tomato powder from Thrive Life, and they have it on clearance because it's been clumping and people just tend to complain about that. But the reason that theirs can clump is because they don't use any kind of additives or any kind of ingredients that would combat against that because they just use the tomatoes, and tomatoes are high in sugar, so they tend to clump. But I buy those clearance cans of tomato powder and open them up, and I just pass them through a wire mesh sieve or strainer, and then I store them in my mason jar with the airtight lid. And I don't have really any problems with it. You can see there's a couple little clumps in here now. This has been stored for a while, so they will break right up if I rub them with my spoon, and they'll definitely dissolve in my dish. So I take advantage of that clearance price and get a lot of this powder on clearance because it works just fine. Okay, so we're using 1 tablespoon of the tomato powder. And next I'm using some beef bouillon. Now you can use any brand of these ingredients, these powdered ingredients that you have, like whatever beef bouillon you have that you like. You can use whatever taco seasoning. With your taco seasoning, you could even make your own if you like to do that. But just remember that depending on which brand you use, sometimes they can vary in like their saltiness levels especially, and they can vary in their taste. So if you do use a different brand, just be aware of that. If you get a different result, you might have to adjust depending on if yours is a little bit more or less salty or the seasonings are a little bit different. I always put the brands that I've used in my recipes down in the description box below the video so that you can see what I'm using. So if you have to go out and get some, then you can use the same sources that I did. And if not, if you're using a different brand, then you can be aware of those differences. We're going to be using 1.5 tablespoons of the beef bouillon. This is Thrive's bouillon also, so it has no MSG. And I do feel like it's a little bit less salty than some, but I guess that's a matter of opinion. So that was 1 tablespoon, and then this is my 1/2 tablespoon. If you don't have 1/2 tablespoon in your set of measuring spoons, it's just the same as 1.5 teaspoons. Now, some people will comment sometimes when they see me putting 1 tablespoon or more of bouillon into a soup recipe like this, and they will say that the amount is wrong and that I must have meant 1 teaspoon. But keep in mind with bouillons that 1 teaspoon of bouillon is the amount to make 1 cup of broth. So really 1 tablespoon is the same as 3 teaspoons. So that's really enough bouillon to equal about 3 cups of broth. And with these soups, we are usually adding at least 5 or 6 cups of water and sometimes more. So it really isn't as much as it seems. All right, so we've got those powders in there. I'm going to give them a little shake, get everything settled, and then we're going to move on to some more solid ingredients. I'm going to be adding some instant black beans. Now, instant beans are beans that have been cooked and then dehydrated or freeze-dried sometimes, it depends. And by doing that, they are so much quicker to cook. So they're really appropriate for a meal like this, because if this was a dried bean, a traditional dried bean, it would have to cook a really long time or under pressure or be soaked ahead of time. So it really wouldn't be appropriate for a quick convenience or emergency meal in a jar. Now I'm using black beans. That's what I like in this, but you really could use any bean that you like or happen to have an instant bean variety of. You could use red beans, kidney beans, pinto beans would be good. Any kind of bean that you like. So I'm going to be using 3/4 cup of the beans. So I've got 1/2 cup to start and then 1/4. And next I'm adding some corn, freeze-dried corn. That's also going to be 3/4 cup. So there's our 1/2 cup and another 1/4. I'm adding some freeze-dried diced tomatoes. Once again, it's also 3/4 cup of these. So there's 1/2 cup. You can see it's getting pretty full. Then another 1/4 cup. Adding some freeze-dried chopped onions. 1/4 cup of the onion. And then we're adding some freeze-dried green chilies. Now these are mild chilies. These are not spicy. You can see I'm down to the end of my container here. I've got to open another can. These are kind of like the type of chilies that you would find in like Rotel canned tomatoes. They give it a nice flavor, but they don't really add any heat. Now, if you do like heat in your taco soup, you could add some freeze-dried or dehydrated jalapenos in with this. You could either substitute the green chilies or add them in addition. I wouldn't probably use 1/4 cup of jalapenos unless you really like it super spicy, especially if they're dehydrated, because dehydrated items will shrink and shrivel. So you get a lot more than you were bargaining for. But you could also add some cayenne flakes or some cayenne powder, anything that you like to add some heat if you like it that way. And then our final ingredient is going to be some freeze-dried minced garlic. This is also getting down to the very end of the container, but I have what I need. I'm using 1 teaspoon of the freeze-dried minced garlic. That is super, super garlicky. It smells so good and it adds a really good garlic flavor. All right, that's all we need in our jar. If you want to put this away for a longer term storage, you're going to want to add an oxygen absorber in the top and then add the lid. And there is our taco soup all ready to label and put on the shelf. Now I'm going to show you how to fix up the taco soup and what it looks like when it's all done. And to do this, I'm going to use my butane emergency burner because this is what I choose. Usually it's my first go-to if I have to cook in a power outage because we have an electric stove. So this is what I use if I just need to cook something indoors when the power's out. It's a really good choice for just basic emergency preparedness. Getting out a soup pot that I'm going to put this together in. So I'm going to go ahead and start by emptying this jar right into my soup pot. Always remove that oxygen absorber. Now you can see I've got a little bit of powder left inside the jar and I don't like to waste any of that. So I usually pour my water into the jar before I add it to the pot. And keep in mind that you do have some rudimentary measurement markings on the jar. So if you don't have a measuring utensil or you're camping or using this for something like that, then you can go ahead and use the jar. Especially for something like a soup where it probably wouldn't matter if the water amount was slightly off. The water amount for this recipe is 6 cups. I've got 4 cups right here. I'm going to go ahead and start by dumping it into the measuring cup and just rinsing out all of those powders. And of course, I also need 2 more cups. So there's our 6 cups of water, and this is cold water. And I'm just going to start by giving this a mix and getting everything blended and moistened. Smells so good. I love tacos. And taco flavored anything. All right, so now that I've got this all moistened, I'm going to turn this on to a medium-high heat. And what I want to do is bring this up to a simmer, and then I'm going to lower the heat and cover it. I'm going to let it simmer covered for about 5 minutes, and that's really all it's going to need. But after that, I'm going to let it set for about 10 minutes or so. That's going to let it finish with rehydrating everything and letting the soup all come together, and it's going to use a minimal amount of fuel. If you were really short on fuel, you could probably bring this right up to a boil. Just turn the heat off and just let it set a little bit longer, and it would probably work just fine, especially if you were to wrap this pot and insulate it somehow after taking it off the heat. It's also not a bad idea to cover the pot while you're bringing it up to a simmer, just because it keeps some of the heat in and it'll help it work a little bit faster. Waste a little bit less fuel there too. All right, now you can see this is just starting to bubble and simmer, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it right down. All right, so I've got it turned down pretty low, so I'm going to go ahead and put the lid on it and just let this go for 5 minutes like this. And then I'm going to just let it set for about 10 more minutes and it'll be ready. These meals are super, super, super quick to prepare, and that's part of the beauty of them. All right, it has been 5 minutes. This is still bubbling away. I'm going to go ahead and turn the heat off. But it still needs to sit just a little bit. It is thickened up, and this doesn't get to be a super thick soup because it's just a soup. It's not like a stew or chowder or anything, but it has thickened up a little bit. And everything is probably just about rehydrated. It might need a little bit longer, but what we really need to happen is for just everything to kind of come together. The freeze-dried food tends to float a little bit longer on the top of the dish, and so letting it set that extra 10 minutes usually lets it kind of all become equally dispersed. All right, so we'll let this set for 10 minutes and it will be ready to serve. All right, 10 minutes is up. Now let's see how this is looking. See, to me, that just looks a lot better. That 10 minutes of setting time is really magical. Now, incidentally, if you don't like your taco soup creamy, I have done this soup without the sour cream powder, and it is equally as tasty. So you could do it either way. If you don't have sour cream powder, you can feel free to just leave it out. It will not have that creaminess to it, but it'll be really good. All right, here we go. And here it is. Doesn't that look delicious? I'm going to let this cool for another minute or two because it's still really hot, and then I'll try it. All right, let's try it. That is really, really good. That is delicious. I love taco stuff. This is really hearty for a taco soup. For our next meal, which is going to be the cheeseburger soup, once again, I'm starting with the hamburger. And once again, I'm using 1 cup of the meat. For anyone who's curious, these meals usually serve about 3 to 4 people. It depends. Sometimes they'll serve more depending on the meal. Soups usually serve a little bit on the generous side because they have a lot of water, so they make a big pot of soup. The next thing I'm adding is the chopped onion, doing 1/3 of a cup of the chopped onion. And next I'm using some carrots. Now these carrots are dehydrated, so you can see they're just teeny little pieces. Now dehydrated food shrinks and shrivels, so these will swell and grow in the soup. But in a soup like this, I usually like to have little pieces of carrot, so this works very well for this purpose. Freeze-dried carrots are a little bit harder to come by commercially, but we are working on a source for you. But for a recipe like this, I sometimes prefer to have the little dehydrated bits. Because they're dehydrated and they will swell and they are pretty strongly concentrated in flavor and sweet, I never use too much of the dehydrated carrot. So this is 1/8 of a cup, which is the same as 2 tablespoons. So if you don't have 1/8 of a cup measure, then just measure out 2 tablespoons. Next, I'm going to be using some celery. Now the celery is freeze-dried. Now you may know that we get most, or if not all, of our freeze-dried ingredients from Thrive Life. They are just known for being the best in the business. They have very clean food. They have no GMOs, no additives, no preservatives, no food dyes, none of that stuff. But it's a sad day because they recently discontinued their celery because it wasn't a big seller for them. I'm going to be using 1/3 of a cup of celery, and what I'm going to do with the celery is, because this celery is sliced, and I would like a little bit smaller pieces for this dish, so I'm just going to break these up. One of the best things about cooking with freeze-dried food is that things are already chopped or sliced or diced, and so you really don't have to chop much at all. You usually just scoop and dump, but in this case, I want these a little bit smaller, and when you do want something smaller, it's super easy just to break it up, or you could do something like chop it with a knife if you were doing a large amount, or run it through a vegetable chopper, or anything like that. A lot of vegetables, if they're, and fruits, if they're super crisp, you can pound them in a baggie with, say, a rolling pin or something. But celery is a little bit, I mean, it's crisp in a way, but it's a little, you know, I can break it easily, but it's a little bit more, I don't know how to explain it. I don't think it would break very well in that way. So I just do it by hand like this, or with a knife or a chopper if I have more to do. But what I would like to say is, while I'm doing this, if you are a fan of the celery and you like the recipes with celery, we are working on another source for celery that we trust. A company that, you know, finding a company that we can trust the way that we trust Thrive Life. But if you are a celery fan and you like to use it in your recipes, it wouldn't hurt to reach out to Thrive Life and let them know that, because they do care about what you know, their customers think and want. And so when they get enough requests for something, they do sometimes bring it back. So if you are so inclined, you can reach out to them, or reach out to us, and we will let you know how to reach out to them if you don't know where to call or write. I know I was pretty sad to see it go, but I have a lot stored in my food storage. So that's one of the benefits of, you know, having a well-stocked pantry and a well-stocked food storage, is that it also protects you for at least a little while from your favorite items being discontinued or being just unavailable for a period of time, because that happens with a lot of things also. Of course, if you have your own freeze dryer, you can freeze dry your own celery, and in that case, you could freeze dry a lot of different shapes. You could freeze dry diced celery, you know, just to begin with, so you didn't have to break it up. I have never done celery yet in our machine, but someday maybe I will do dices so I have that shape without having to break them. But for now, this is easier. And our machine is down right now, and we have not had time to even deal with it. So that's not going to happen anytime soon. So for now, I will just break this up. This is just my preference, though, for this particular soup. Sometimes I like to leave these in whole slices. Just depends on what I'm making. And if you think that you would like this with the larger slices of celery, then you can certainly go ahead and leave them whole. I have done that plenty of times when I didn't feel like breaking or cutting it up. If you do use dehydrated because you have dehydrated or that's all you can find, you want to use quite a bit less, because you can tell by looking at this that freeze-dried food does not change in shape and size. It comes out of the freeze dryer basically looking exactly like it went in, but with all the moisture removed. And that's part of the reason why freeze-dried food has such a good quality, because it doesn't damage the cells and damage the cell walls the way that a lot of other forms of food preservation do, like dehydrating. But because of that, it doesn't shrink at all. And dehydrated does shrink. So you're going to want to use at least half to maybe even just 1/3 of dehydrated if you use dehydrated in this place. You'll also want to make sure that you give it enough time to rehydrate in the cooking process, but those carrots rehydrate just fine. So I think that dehydrated celery would as well. All right, now I'm going to add a few seasoning and powdered ingredients. I'm going to be using some basil. Now, if you watch my channel often, you probably know I have my little spice dispensers that dispense 1/4 teaspoon at a time, which I love, and it's super handy. But basil is one of those things that I have certain favorite recipes that I make that use this. One recipe in particular where you dump in handfuls at a time. So I keep it in a bigger jar. But I usually also have some in my little dispenser, but I just haven't filled it up recently. because today I only need a small amount. I only need a half a teaspoon. So it would really be handy to have it in my little dispenser. So there's a half a teaspoon of basil. I'm also using some dried parsley, and this is another one that I tend to use in large quantities. So I sometimes just bring out the whole jug, and I haven't filled up my little dispenser. This parsley is filled with static electricity. I'm going to be using some salt and black pepper, half a teaspoon of salt, and a quarter teaspoon of pepper. Of course, like with any recipe, these seasonings are basically a guideline, and you can change or increase or decrease any of them to suit your own tastes, especially with something like salt. Some people can't have as much salt or don't like to have as much salt, and some people like their food really, really salty. So, you can change and add a lot of those as you prefer. I do recommend whenever you try a new recipe like this that you make up one batch and test it out for your family. Make sure your family likes it. And if you do need to make any of those adjustments, then you can make them. And then once you know exactly how you like it, then you can make it up in bulk, because it's super handy. It's like a batch cooking day to just make up, a whole bunch of jars all at once, because you've got all your ingredients out already. And it's just as easy to fill, 10 or 12 jars as it is to fill one. But I don't recommend you do that right off without making one first and trying it, because everyone has different tastes. So you just never know if you're going to like a recipe as much as I like the recipe, or as much as somebody else likes the recipe. Next, I'm going to use some chicken bouillon. This is not the greatest bouillon, but it's just one that I'm using up, and I don't mind the taste of it. It just has some ingredients that aren't that desirable. But like with anything else, you can use whatever brand you have on hand with bouillons. They probably can vary in saltiness. So if you do, depending on what brand you use, you may need to adjust more or less. So that was a tablespoon of the chicken bouillon. Next, I'm going to add my freeze-dried diced potatoes. And I'm going to be adding 1.5 cups of the potatoes. So there's a cup and another 1/2 cup. Now you can see that this jar is getting pretty full, but the rest of our ingredients are all powdered ingredients, so they should also filter down amongst the potatoes, just like our other powders did. I'm going to be adding 1/4 cup of instant milk. This is another ingredient where the brand can probably make a difference. So I will put the brand that I use down in the description box, and it is 50% off right now. So it's actually a really good deal. So it's and it's really good tasting too. It's a good instant milk to have in your food storage. Anytime you're out of milk or you just need a little bit and you don't want to run to the store, it's a great thing to have. Next, I'm going to use some sour cream powder. This is one where I know the brand can make a difference, because I have tried several different brands and had very different tastes between brands, to where I wasn't able to use them interchangeably between recipes. So that's why I usually recommend people to keep an eye on the brands. It doesn't mean you can't use another brand that you have or try another brand, but just be aware that you could get a different result in the recipe. That's 1/4 cup of sour cream powder. Sometimes we have to jiggle and tap and shake just to get everything to settle down. You can fit everything in. Luckily, there's only one more ingredient. Oh, I lied. There's 2 more ingredients. I forgot about the cheese. You can't have cheeseburger soup without cheese. So we are going to use some cheddar cheese powder. This is Judy's brand cheddar cheese powder. With cheese powder and cheese sauce powders, not only do you have to watch out for the brand, but you also have to watch out for what the product actually is. This is a cheese powder, so it's basically just mostly powdered cheese, as opposed to some items that are like a cheese sauce powder. So they also include other ingredients to make a cheese sauce, like maybe dairy ingredients like milk and butter, thickening ingredients. It's just a different product. There's also something called cheese blend powder, and I'm not really 100% sure. I guess that's just a blend of cheeses, but I have used a cheese blend powder from Augustin Farms and not been very impressed with it compared to other cheese powders and cheese sauce powders that I've used. So just be aware of what you are getting and using if you're not using the same brand that's called for in the recipe. I actually tested this recipe with several different cheese powders and cheese sauce powders, and this was the one that ended up being the winner. Those of you who have made a lot of my recipes will appreciate knowing that this is the same cheese powder that I've used in some of my other dishes. So if you already have it, then you've already got this ingredient. All right, the final ingredient is going to be mashed potato flakes. Now this is going to thicken this soup nicely, and this works really well to thicken a lot of different creamy type of soups. So keep this little trick up your sleeve. It's a really great thickener for soups like this. So I'm using a half a cup of the potato flakes. And we are right up to the top of this jar. You can see once you carefully take that funnel away, it does leave a little bit, it goes down more than you think it will. Once again, if you wanted to store this on your shelf for longer than just a few months, you'll want to add a 200cc oxygen absorber in the jar and then add your lid. Now, I have had jars like this on my shelf for over a year without having an oxygen absorber in them, and they have been just fine. But I don't recommend that. If it happens, then it's probably fine. But if you plan to store it for more than a few months, I would recommend using the oxygen absorber. With an oxygen absorber, depending on the recipe, depending on the ingredients, usually these meals can last on the shelf for at least, say, 5 to 8 years. I've never had any on my shelf that long because we use these also for just convenience meals and just anytime we need a quick meal or a gift for someone or something to bring to someone who's sick. These are great for so many things. So we don't tend to keep them on our shelves that long. We like to rotate through them, but it is good knowing that they are shelf stable for a good long while if you get that oxygen absorber in there. Some people also do vacuum seal these. If you're doing something like this that's got powders in it, you're going to need to use something to, protect from the powders coming up through. So like a cupcake paper wrapper or something like that will work, or a piece of coffee filter or something like that. But I prefer to use the oxygen absorbers because oxygen absorbers will react with every bit of oxygen in the jar. They don't take away all the air, they just take away all the oxygen. Whereas a vacuum sealer is sucking out part of the air, but it can't suck out all of the air or the jar would collapse and it's not going to only get the oxygen. I'm not sure if that really makes any sense, but I just think that the oxygen absorber is a little bit more effective. But a lot of people use the vacuum sealers and have perfectly good luck with them. So whatever you feel comfortable with is what you should do. All right, now I'm going to fix up the cheeseburger soup for you and show you how this one looks when it's done. And I'm going to do it the same way with my emergency butane burner. I'm going to go ahead and empty the jar into the pot. And I'm going to do the same thing with the water. It's going to be 6 cups again of cold water, and I am going to use it to rinse out any residue in my jar. And 2 more cups for 6 cups total. And now I'm going to go ahead and give this a stir to blend and moisten. It is okay to still see some clumps in this when we get it started, because once the heat comes on and the water starts to heat, all the clumps will start to melt in, just like dairy would normally. All right, and I'm going to do the same thing with this soup. I'm going to go ahead and put it on a medium-high heat until it comes up to a simmer. Lower the heat, cover it, simmer it for 5 minutes, and then let it set for another 10 minutes. Okay, now that it's been 5 minutes of simmering, I'm going to turn the heat off, and I'm just going to put the lid back on, and I'm going to let this set for 10 more minutes off the heat, and then it should be ready to serve. All right, let's give it a try. Oh, that is so good. This is my favorite kind of soup, rich and thick and creamy. This is going to be a very filling and very satisfying soup. It's delicious. I will have recipe pages that you can save or print linked down below. I have a whole collection of meal in a jar recipes and videos that I'm always adding to. I'll put a link to the playlist down below for you if you're looking for more recipes. And make sure that you're subscribed to the channel as well. I do have some tips for saving money and cutting costs when it comes to putting these recipes together. Here's what I do. First, I try to stock up on ingredients when they're on sale because all the ingredients used are shelf stable. I can really stock up whenever the prices drop. If you want to make sure that you don't miss a deal, join my Deal Alerts text service by texting alert to my number down below. And I will send you an alert right to your phone whenever there's a new sale, flash sale, or coupon code for the ingredients I use in my jar meals. Don't worry, this is usually no more than 2 to 3 texts a month. I also have a Facebook group for prepping deals in general. Head on over there, join, and turn on all notifications to get some great deals. The absolutely best way to save on these meals, though, is getting some or all of your ingredients for free. Yes, it is possible. Most, if not all, of the proteins, dairy, and produce ingredients that I use are from Thrive Life. They're known as the gold standard in freeze-dried foods, with very clean, single ingredient foods, no GMOs, and a very serious commitment to high quality. They have an amazing new program for their consultants that gives every consultant free credit back on every order they place. As a Thrive Life consultant, you could earn 10% free credit back on every order. But for the first 3 months, right now, they're actually doubling that to 20%, which is absolutely amazing. And if you wanted to go a step further and share it with people that you know who might benefit from it, you can even earn cash rewards that could cover the remainder of what you order. So think about if you know anyone who would want clean food for their family, or who would like to build up their emergency pantry a bit, or who would enjoy making jar meals like these that I showed today for themselves or as gifts. You could actually host meal in a jar parties or classes and basically have a food supply that pays for itself. I originally joined for that very reason, and it's been amazing. If you think this is something you might be interested in, text EARN to my number and I can tell you more, or you can ask me any questions that you might have. It's something I'm very passionate about, so I love to talk to people about it. Thank you for spending some of your valuable time with me today. I hope that you enjoy these new meal in a jar recipes. And if you're new to meals in a jar, I hope you can see just how helpful these can be in the pantry. From feeding your family during an emergency or a power outage, to saving your sanity on a busy day, to being a wonderful gift or a blessing for someone in need. These little jars are simply magic. If you made it all the way to the end of the video, leave me a taco or a cheeseburger emoji down in the comments to tell me which soup you think you'd like better. And check out this video next for some more comforting soup recipes. I'm Jara with Wicked Prepared. Survive today, thrive tomorrow. We'll see you next time.